Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being covered in the upcoming edition of the North Coast Journal. My name is Dave Frank, and I'm joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and arts and features editor, Jennifer Famiko Cahill. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Hey, David. How you doing?
Pretty good. So it sounds like we are going to be diving right in and looking at what's on the cover and learning more about how COVID is impacting our community. Thad, what did you cover this week?
Yeah, covered all things COVID in Humboldt County this weekend. I think kind of a starting place for the story was, I think as most people are probably aware, we're in the midst of, the most significant case spike we've seen since right after shelter in place, since early in May. And I think that there's a kind of one of the things we realized is there's a disconnect between, people as they're seeing test results coming in and they're seeing numbers go up. And I think there's all too common people associate that with kind of an immediate result to what's happening now. And so some people, saw test results coming in over the weekend and associated it with bars reopening, which happened really recently, or movie theaters reopening, when really there's a significant lag time between what we're seeing with the tests. The officials are kind of fond of saying a test is just a snapshot in time. So it's whether you were COVID positive or negative the moment you got this, the sample taken. And it doesn't reflect whether you had the virus before or whether you could get the virus in the future. And that's true. It is a picture of a moment in time, but the results we're seeing today are really a picture of a few weeks ago. And the reason of that is, there's up to a 14-day incubation period for COVID. So somebody who, contracts the virus, even somebody who's going to become symptomatic might not become symptomatic for a couple weeks. And then there's a lag time, an increasing lag time on getting test results at this point. We found out in recent days that the Optum site in Eureka, where anybody can sign up and go get tested, is facing turnaround times of 8 days or even more.
Oh, wow.
Due to kind of the national spike in cases, the statewide spike in cases. Lots more people are getting testing. There's cities and counties have ramped up testing capacity, but all these samples are then being funneled through these same laboratories to actually get processed and get results back. And so that's just kind of stretched out. So really the test results that we're seeing today, some of them are people who got tested a week ago. And that's why, the first spike we had in cases happened, like I said, right after shelter in place restrictions when it came into place. And I think I misspoke. I think they said in May, but it was actually in early April. And that's a good indication that it wasn't that there was more activity going on, causing the spread of COVID at that point. It was that, there was this delay in seeing what was already out there. And so the same thing is happening now. Really, Dr. Frankovich said at a briefing to the Board of Supervisors yesterday that she feels like what the spike we're seeing now is still attributable to Memorial Day and kind of the reverberations of that. And she was saying that the spike that we might see from 4th of July, depending on how people did or didn't follow health orders and whether or not they congregated with other households and stuff, if there is a spike there, we'll probably still be seeing it for another 6 or 10 weeks as it reverberates out and from household to household. So that was a big thing we wanted to address with the story. It's just kind of this lag time and from what's happening in real time to what we're seeing in the numbers.
So a couple things to follow up on. One is, so we are experiencing these delays now because of increased testing. Was there any conversation about alternatives to this current testing vendor or ways that we can sort of increase the speed with which we get results?
Not substantively, so Dr. Frankovich has said that this is the delay in testing time is hugely problematic. They're also having problems with the reservation software and stuff like that. So she is clearly displeased with the way Optum is working currently, with the way that site is working. The problem is that every community in California, certainly, and most of the United States now is facing these same questions. And so you just run into these massive supply chain issues, and it's really hard in the midst of a pandemic to create new testing sites and all this stuff. So yes, there's a lot of motivation to find a different model, a different testing site, a different company that might work. But there's a ton of demand out there. So I don't know how realistic the prospects of getting something else up and running is.
And then my second question is, so what were some of the common reasons or justifications we think for why there's the increase now? You mentioned that people are possibly just doing more social interactions. Were there any other sort of paths or vectors for increased cases?
Yeah, I mean, the two that health officials have repeatedly pointed to are travel and gathering, and they tend to go hand in hand in some instances. But both Deputy Health Officer Josh Enos and Dr. Frankovich have said that the vast majority of the cases that we're seeing recently, and we've seen I think 42 new cases confirmed in the last 15 days, through contact tracing, they're saying those are clusters of infected households. So somebody in the household will get sick, and then everybody in the household will get sick. But they're popping up more and more because they're seeing more and more small gatherings between households, birthday parties, barbecues, just get-togethers between family members, friends, but really people who live apart getting together, and that just turns what was potentially an insular cluster of 4 or 5 people in a house to 2 or 3 houses where everybody's getting sick, and that's really the rapid spread. They say there also have been a few instances of either people having visitors from out of county come stay with them, who then get a household here sick and go back home, or more commonly, people here traveling out of county to go to a gathering, to go to a graduation party, a birthday party, a family reunion, and then coming back infected with COVID and infecting their household.
Which I hope is something that people are going to think about as they go about their daily lives now. I mean, even as much as I am living and breathing all of this by, reading everything that Thad and the rest of our team has been writing about it and every press release that comes in, we still have moments where my husband and I look at each other and we've gotten an invitation for the kids to go have a, socially distant play date somewhere. And we're like, is this normal? Everybody else is doing this. And then we have to remember that bringing households together, especially households where you can't control your children from running toward the same puppy in the yard or something like that. That's where our numbers are coming from, is from making these kinds of really simple choices that are largely emotional choices.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a degree of personal responsibility, I guess, ultimately, and delayed gratification that Dr. Frankovich and the other experts are trying to instill upon us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a sense of some in the community. I mean, certainly it's a sentiment I've seen expressed on social media and our comment section and stuff that, people feel like because, the critical outcomes disproportionately fall on seniors, on compromised communities, on already at-risk communities. There's, some feeling among some people are like, well, why don't they just sequester and they stay inside and we can go on about living our lives? There's 2 big problems with that line of thought. One is, the statistics say that it is more commonly devastating on those communities, but there's also, plenty of statistics that show, very healthy, able-bodied, people and, young people have gotten tremendously sick and died from the virus and the disease. But there's also, it becomes exponentially harder to protect vulnerable populations, whether they're in skilled nursing homes or elsewhere, when there's just more and more COVID circulating in the community. So the more that we throw caution, that healthy people throw caution to the wind and have barbecues and intermix households, the more COVID's going to spread and the harder it's going to be to protect those vulnerable populations and keep COVID out of those facilities.
And just to wrap things up with the cover story, I did hear that this also, even because we only have, say, whatever the number is, 75 to 100 intensive care beds that were particularly vulnerable to large gatherings having a geometric progression of impact. So like one party could ruin our track and trace, one party could overwhelm the hospital, and that's to, like I said, reinforce the idea that it really is something we have to be vigilant about.
Absolutely, yeah, and especially with large gatherings. I know we're running out of time, but Dr. Frankovich said on Tuesday in front of the board that she's heard that there's weddings planned with hundreds of attendees invited, which is just terrifying to health officials, because you think about those 100 people, 200 people coming to a gathering. Maybe there's somebody who has COVID there. Maybe there's a mass infection event. Those 100 or 200 people go back to their separate homes where they're infecting the people that they live with and maybe gathering with other homes, and it just reverberates out and can get out of control really, really quickly.
We're like a chicken dance away from disaster.
Thanks, Thad. So Jennifer, what are you covering this week in the Arts and Features beat?
We have a couple of great pieces in this week's issue. One of them is kind of emotionally intense. Louisa Rogers wrote about going solo swimming. She is a person who I remember back before she started to fall in love with stand-up paddleboarding. Louisa used to swim in the bay. She would put on a wetsuit and just dive into Humboldt Bay and swim it. I don't know. I freak myself out in the pool, but she's out here swimming in the bay. And anyway, she talks about an experience she had when she went to swim with a handful of women that she didn't know. And she swam on Stone Lagoon, and it got foggy and she got lost. She was in the water and not knowing which way shore was. And it's kind of a nail biter.
Pretty harrowing.
But it also, and it also has some advice for not getting into that kind of trouble. So absolutely worth a read.
Excellent.
And also we have Wendy Chan, a wonderful recipe from Wendy Chan about making the most of the berries that are around. It works for blueberries and it works for blackberries. Whether you are getting the imported Himalayan giant blackberries, I only recently learned that there's a lot of drama around what kind of berries you have, whether you have the local ones or the imported ones. It will work for all the berries. It's this gorgeous tart, and it's one of those deep purple, like get me a lipstick this color, beautiful, sort of like a flat surface on a gorgeous shallow tart with rose petals, and it has rose water in it. It's delightful. It's like everything I want in a romance novel and never get. And sadly, I was saying before we went on air that I had a terrible personal tragedy, which is that I made a blueberry tart, and it was latticed, and I was feeling it was a little homey, you know. It was a blueberry pie with a lattice top, and it was just, I was feeling extremely like Mayberry about this thing, and I was feeling good. I was ready to post it. I took glamour shots, and I actually was about to text Wendy a photo of it saying, look what I did. And then she sent me this picture of this gorgeous cover of Vogue tart. And I suddenly felt like a child in the backyard making a mud pie, and it was heartening. But she assures me that making this beautiful is actually very easy. You pour it, set it, and it goes flat, and suddenly you are a fancy pastry chef.
Well, I would feel accomplished if I made a blueberry pie. It doesn't have to be pastry couture to get a thumbs up from your friends and family. So
you are very different from me, David.
Oh my goodness. Well, I do miss the days when you would bring us in samples, because that was always fun.
In-person meetings, it's just not the time.
Right, wrong year.
I'm afraid I have to eat them alone.
One of my great regrets about no longer going to the North Coast Journal office is Wendy Chan no longer visits with dumplings and pie and all kinds of wonderful, tantalizing treats.
Someday.
Yeah. We have all lost in this thing.
Well, guys, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up this week's episode?
Stay socially distant while you pick those berries.
Yeah. Visit northcoastjournal.com to keep up with the latest and keep an eye on those test results this week.
Awesome. Thanks, Thad and Jennifer. That'll just about do it for this week. North Coast Journal is on newsstands now, and you can find it online. Thad, Jennifer, thank you so much. We'll see you guys again next time. Take care.
Thanks, David.
You too. Be safe.